This is the Virgin Mary. She is one of the most recognized figures of all time, and there's a good reason for it. She keeps appearing to people. Really, as someone who was never invested in religion, miracles and apparitions always seemed like a distant delusion to me. That was until I started digging. For instance, did you know that the lady not only appears to Catholics but also to atheists? And that she reportedly appeared to thousands of Muslims in the 20th and 21st century? And what I'm talking about here is not pareidolia or the Madonna on a toast. It is also not people with mental illnesses or psychosis. And we know this because we had different scientific teams do brain scans to the people that have been subjected to apparitions, what we call seers. One of the most recent cases that we're still studying happened in Bosnia in the 80s, in Medjugorje, and it's still happening up until today. So this is also not an optical illusion. These generally happen throughout several events and are generally seen by more than one person. In fact, the church makes thorough investigations on these apparitions and accepts less than 0.1% of all the cases reported. But this data has two problems. The first one is that we're not talking about a physical manifestation, and so data like photos and videos can't be reliably collected or replicated. And the second one is that most of the people who've analyzed this topic have had some kind of bias. On one side we have the theologians who interpret the data with their own dogmas, and on the other side we have the skeptics.
Because your senses is some of the worst data-taking devices that exist.
The goal of this video is not to prove whether Marian apparitions are real or not, but to drop the dogmas and the biases and to look at the full spectrum of data without using the Bible as the sole source of truth. And from what I've gathered, the data points towards something very bizarre. I will also show how this aligns with the occult and some of the most interesting theories today. Stay tuned to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. If you ever heard of Lourdes, Fátima, or Guadalupe, those are apparitions. It's when a supposedly supernatural entity unexpectedly initiates contact with humans. When the contact is silent, it's called a vision. If there's a message, it's called an apparition. In the last few centuries, the Vatican has received over 25,000 apparition reports. But it was in the 20th century that we saw the biggest spike in reported cases, with 386 being deeply analyzed by the Church. Now, credit where credit is due. The Vatican makes great investigations to weed out misidentifications, natural phenomena, liars, mental illusions, psychotic episodes. These investigations can take months and involve dozens of people. So although I don't align with the Church's interpretation, I overall accept their verdicts of authenticity. Currently, we have 16 apparitions of Mary officially approved by the Vatican. Now, here's the part that makes this so hard to study. For an apparition to be approved, it has to follow a set of criteria defined by the Church. For instance, it needs to be in accordance with the Catholic faith, it needs to not confront the current teachings, not undermine the authority of the bishop, among many other criteria. If these conditions are not met, the apparition can be authentic, but the message is considered false by the Church. This means that less than 1% of the cases are investigated, and less than 0.1% of the cases are approved. In scientific investigations, this 0.1% would actually be considered the outliers. So this begs the question, are we ignoring authentic apparitions because the Vatican doesn't like the message? Now, one of the first things you notice is that the theological study of Mary is called Mariology, but even this might be a misnomer. Why? Because the entities appearing often don't present themselves as Mary. In many cases, the seers ask directly to the entity who they are, but the entity ignores the question or laughs it off. For instance, and you can open Wikipedia and follow along. In Lourdes, the lady that appeared to Bernadette didn't identify herself as Mary, and after several apparitions, the local priest said that he wouldn't put up a chapel before knowing the name of the entity. After 14 apparitions, the girl asked again, and again the entity smiled and laughed. On the 16th apparition, the lady eventually said,
"I am the Immaculate Conception."
And even when the entities answer, they are still very strict about what you can call them and how to invoke them. In Amsterdam, Ida Peerdman saw a light from which a woman came, and then she asked this woman directly,
"Are you the Virgin Mary?"
And the woman answered,
"They will call me the Lady. You may say, the Lady of all nations, who once was Mary."
These last words were highly controversial at the time, As another example, in Erolsbach in Germany, the lady appeared to a group of children and then took some time to identify herself. And eventually, she told the children the following:
I am the Queen of Roses. Don't confuse me with the Queen of Rosary.
Aren't they supposed to be the same? Another example is the very first Marian apparition, Virgen del Pilar. It happened to the Apostle James the Greater in Spain in the year 40 AD. And the strangest thing about this is that it happened while the actual Mary was still alive. Again, she never introduced herself as Mary. The apostle just assumed that it was her, and the church accepted this apparition and explained it by saying that it was a miraculous phenomenon of bilocation. And they can go on with dozens of examples where an entity appears and we call her Our Lady Mary because of religious assumptions. And I'm saying entity because from apparition to apparition we see different personalities, different messages, different names. She sometimes demands titles like Queen of Heaven, Star of the Sea, Queen of the Universe. You get the point. In face of these bizarre elements, some people continue to say that it's just auditory or optical illusions, but as we're going to see, these are not one-time events seen by one person. For instance, in Fátima, 3 children were able to see the visions of the lady, but the boy was never able to hear the message. In Boran, the lady appeared a total of 32 times to 5 children, who were all able to see the same vision. In Hid, Germany, the lady appeared over 100 times to these 4 children. What these cases and many others have in common is that the group of seers receive exactly the same message, but the people around the seers cannot see the lady. This gives credence to the idea that these are not auditory or visual illusions, but a mental phenomenon. Even if you were there when the lady appears, you would not be able to see her. We know this because several cases of the 20th and 21st century have been photographed and documented, and as soon as the lady appears, the group of seers is reported to react immediately and simultaneously without warning. In some instances, the crowd described the children kneeling so fast in reaction to her presence that they risked breaking their knees. The report of the seers also stay consistent when they are interrogated individually and over their lifetime. These events are so intense that they profoundly change the life of the people who see it, oftentimes bringing societal rejection, personal attacks. In several cases, the seers were even arrested or burned at the stake. And the lady herself has been controversial to the church since the first few apparitions. Many Christian denominations instill that
the revelation of Christ ceased with the death of the last apostle.
However, the Roman Catholic Church knew that if they outright rejected all apparitions, individual cults would start to develop and they would lose control of the narrative. So they decided to accept some apparitions as private revelations. That's why the Vatican never approves an apparition instantly. Generally, they only validate them dozens of years in posterity when all the involved people are dead and the message has been softened. Now, let me share with you the spectacular example of Fátima. This is the place where probably the most famous modern-day miracle happened. So firstly, the story actually starts in 1915, 2 years before the Virgin Mary appears, when the 3 children saw an angel appear above a tree. After they prayed to the angel, it disappeared. Then, this angel appeared 3 more times in 1916. In the first encounter, the angel simply said,
"Do not be afraid. I am the angel of peace. Pray with me."
In the second time, he was more direct.
"What are you doing? Pray. Pray very much. The hearts of Jesus and Mary have designs of mercy for you. Offer prayers and sacrifices constantly to the Most High.
How are we to make sacrifices?
Make of everything you can a sacrifice, and offer it to God as an act of reparation for the sins by which he is offended."
But the third time was the most bizarre.
Holding a chalice in his hands, with a host above it from which some drops of blood were falling into the sacred vessel. Leaving the chalice and the host suspended in the air, the angel prostrated on the ground and repeated the same prayer 3 times. Then, rising, he once more took the chalice and the host in his hands. He gave the host to me, and to Jacinta and Francisco he gave the contents of the chalice to drink, while saying,
"Take and drink the body and blood of Jesus Christ, horribly outraged by ungrateful men. Repair their crimes and console your God."
After this event, they started seeing a lady. As usual, this lady did not identify herself right away. She just said that God was offended and that she needed sacrifice, penance, and lots of prayer. Eventually, she told the children that she would appear on the 13th of every month, and then by October, she would perform a miracle for everyone to see. The lady also told them directly that 2 of them would die shortly after. And they did. Can you guess which ones? Exactly. The ones that drank the blood given by the angel. And thereon, she would appear to give messages, ask for prayer, sacrifice, and penance. And then, the 6th apparition is the most interesting. Known as the Miracle of the Sun, it gathered over 50,000 people. It was raining, and when the lady appeared, it stopped raining and everybody became instantly dry. Most people reported seeing the sun behaving strangely, changing colors and moving erratically. And then suddenly the sun started descending on the earth while radiating a strange heat, which caused general panic. There were cameras at the event, but they couldn't capture what was going on in the sky because of the bright lights. What really happened was a mystery, because some people reported seeing nothing at all, while others reported seeing a spinning silvery disc. There were even reports of a substance falling from the sky, which people have named angel hair. The author Jack Vallée has used these testimonies to establish a parallel between the miracle of the sun and the UFO event. And this is not the first time that a miracle of the sun happened. It has been reported in Heroldsbach, in Ile Bochard, in Lubbock, in Baneu, among many others. And even Lucy at one point thought that the lady was an evil force. She also reported having different physical and psychological effects in the presence of the angel when compared to the presence of the lady. With the angel she would report feeling paralyzed and hypnotized and then exhausted, while with the lady she felt ecstasy and then calmness. Fátima is such a great example because we have tons of information available which allows us to compare with other cases. For instance, this case in Heroldsbach, Germany is eerily similar, but it wasn't approved by the church, which is strange because it has so many similarities. It was seen by a group of children. It started with flashes of light. An angel gave children communion, which included drinking blood from a chalice. The entity asked for direct prayers in order to get to her son. They were told many times to pray the rosary. It culminated in a miracle of the sun that was seen by thousands. And some people even reported seeing a spinning disc in the sky, among many other similar points. In Borin, Belgium, 5 children aged 9 to 15 started having simultaneous apparitions of a woman who identified herself as the Mother of God and the Queen of Heaven. Over 33 apparitions, there were reports of cures in the village and secrets given to the children. And the last interaction with this entity was when the lady said the following to one of the children.
Do you love my son?
Yes.
Do you love me?
Yeah.
Then sacrifice yourself for me.
Siluva, Lithuania. A woman appeared crying with a baby in her arms. She was distressed that her original church was no longer there and accused the people of using the land for farming and raising animals instead of praying and building churches. Kibeho, Rwanda. The lady appeared to 3 children and asked for endless prayers and expiation. The Virgin even instructed one of the kids to perform penances through mortification of the flesh. She gave visions of horror, which many people now believe to have foretold the Rwanda genocide that happened 13 years after. In Poumont, France, 2 siblings started seeing the lady, but the parents weren't able to see her, so they called more people, and while none of the arriving adults were able to see the vision, all of the children were able to see her and would describe the exact same thing, even without hearing the previous kids' descriptions. In Akita, Japan, after seeing the statue of Our Lady weep and with marks of stigmata, Sister Sasagawa saw a vision of the lady, and this vision told her the following.
If men do not repent and better themselves, the Father will inflict a terrible punishment on all humanity. Much fire will fall from the sky and will wipe out a great part of humanity, the good as well as the bad, sparing neither priests nor faithful. I alone am able still to save you from the calamities which approach.
In Bayside, New York, the lady appeared dozens of times and said the church was corrupt and the Vatican was full of evil. That if there was no atonement and penance, something will be terrible beyond comprehension. She strangely said that UFOs are transports of hell with aliens inside, which are creatures of Satan, among many other strange messages. In Heed, Germany, the lady appears with a child in her arms, warns over and over again with great suffering, and makes claims about the end of the world, suffering like never before, and that soon a minor judgment will occur. In La Salette, France, 2 children saw a big ball of light and then perceived a woman dressed in white.
I give you 6 days to work. I keep the 7th for myself, and no one will give it to me. This is what makes the arm of my son so heavy.
She proceeds to warn them that they will suffer and starve if they don't do as she says. Oh, and she wore a crucifix on her chest of Jesus with a hammer and a pincer. I mean, who wears a representation of their son's murder as jewelry? And why is she the symbol of humility and humbleness when she often appears with golden crowns, fine clothing, jewelry? And why does she talk about Jesus like he wants destruction and she's the only thing stopping him? Wasn't the message about love and turning the other cheek? And why does she sometimes show up with baby Jesus when he died as an adult? And why is she an adult in these visions? She's estimated to have conceived between the ages of 12 and 16. And why is she sometimes crying? Wouldn't it be more effective to give us all a vision of heaven or healing an amputee? Unless the point was not to convince, but to manipulate. Now, I'm far from having any concrete answers, but I do have some pieces of the puzzle that you might find interesting. As I went deeper into this topic, I felt the need for some sobriety, and so I shared some of the data that I collected online. And the response was astonishing. Hundreds of people commented and sent me messages, sharing their experiences, adding pieces to the puzzle, and because of this, several connections popped up. As an exercise, take a listen to this event.
It all began when I was 10 years old, when I went up into the woods and saw a beautiful lady on a rock with a stream going by. She was dressed in beautiful, flowing gown, and she had long blonde hair and gold-colored eyes. And she seemed to be waiting for me, spoke in perfect English and a beautiful voice. And I was only 10 years old, but I want to tell you, this was quite an experience. She was like an angel, and she seemed to know all about me, and she mentioned some things that would happen in the near future. She departed like a vision.
It looks like a normal description of an encounter with a lady, right? But it is actually Howard Merger, a man who claims to have been contacted several times by an alien species that would manifest in different forms. What about this event?
In front of me was this beautiful woman, and she's floating 3 feet off the ground. And her dress was white dress that was sparkling like stars in the sky, and it was Roman looking. She was beautiful, had translucent blonde hair, bright blue eyes. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I can't describe that feeling. She looks at me and she says, "You know why I'm here. This is your burden you must keep. If you do, I will be there with you and I will guide you."
The same thing happened to Chris Bledsoe. He also had several encounters with entities and orbs, and eventually with a lady. This lady told him that he has to carry a burden, which is to tell the world her message. Just like in Fátima, Haid, and many other cases, the lady gave him secrets and prophecies, which he has to keep to himself until a certain point. Chris was indeed a Christian, and so he assumed he was talking with Our Lady, but she later presented herself as Hathor, an ancient Egyptian deity who strangely also took for herself the title of Queen of Heavens. And you can see the similarities in the representations. So yes, the lady appears outside of the Christian faith, but we treat the data separately because we give it different names. And if we look at mythology and folklore, we'll find hundreds of these descriptions. You can find the lady in pagan mythology of the Gauls, the ladies of the lake in Great Britain, the Morrigan in Irish paganism, the Caperosa in the Philippines, the Yurei in Japan, the Whittleweaven in the Netherlands. The Gnostics talk about Sophia. She has even been called Inanna in ancient Sumer and Ishtar in Babylon, and in both places she had the title of, you guessed it, Queen of Heaven. You can even see the halo in most depictions. Florentine Frank composed a pamphlet with all the titles given to Mary, and he found more than 555. One of them, in Litany of Loreto, is Stella Matutina, meaning morning star, the same name that we give in Latin to Lucifer. The lady also appears to Muslims. A great example is Egypt, that has several apparition cases. In fact, the lady is referenced more often in the Quran than in the Bible. Another element that I find interesting is how this female presence is also reported frequently in DMT trips. Some people call her the Magenta Lady, others the Purple Energy, others the Divine Feminine. Those who study this topic say that this force takes the shape of something that a person will be able to understand, but also camouflages in absurdity. It seems as if seeing the lady doesn't make you look crazy. Talking about her does. So I have to ask, what do these entities want? The occult is where this gets really weird, because there's an uncanny connection between apparitions and the way people invoke spirits. The process is mostly symbolic. First, people draw some symbols on the ground, generally a circle on which the action will happen. Then they say the invocation for the specific angel, demon or spirit that they want with a set of words. Sometimes they wear symbols or garments, and they need to have in mind the name of the entity that they want to invoke. Now here's the weird part. First, we have the space. The entity that appears almost always asks for a church to be built. It's the creation and voluntary entrance in a liminal or spiritual space. In one apparition, the lady even rejects the architectural plans for the church and demands it to be bigger, so she comes back in the following apparition to approve the final drawing. Second is the name. She demands that you say the name that she gave us correctly and that you keep it in your mind as long as possible. Third is the evocation. Generally, the entities give you a prayer that you have to repeat. Those would be the words for the evocation that you have to keep in your mind over and over again. In some cases, people repeat the prayer so many times that they get into a trance-like state. And the fourth is the symbol. The entity also gives symbols for the people to wear. In many cases, the entity is very specific about the design and they request that it is worn by all the faithful. Even the rosary is an object that came out of an apparition. The concept was given to Dominique de Guzman during the vision of Our Lady of the Rosary. And do we ever see these four elements appearing together in a single apparition event? Yes, we do. Looking from outside, it appears that there's some kind of entity that is able to communicate with some people under the right circumstances. These entities would adapt to the person's fears, culture, beliefs, and then they would communicate using strong emotions like shame, greed, pity, ecstasy. For over 2000 years, these entities have been communicating the same narrative, that the Armageddon is imminent, that nobody knows when, but it will come and bring the biggest suffering that we can ever imagine, and that we must surrender and worship, because of course, only they can save us from the suffering that they will bring us. So what if they're lying? In occult practices, there are 3 extra steps that experienced summoners take. One of them is that they have a sword with them, or any other weapon, so that the entity can see them as a symbol of authority. The second one is saying out loud, "Tell me your real name and do not lie." To me, it seems strange that you would ask these entities not to lie, but it shows that deep down, these occultists know that these entities often play tricks. They lie, they disguise themselves as other entities. Even the Christians love to say that the devil plays tricks. And the third one is the exchange. The summoner makes a deal with the entity in the sense that they will give something and ask for something in return. Sometimes the human give food and wine, sometimes sexual indulgences, sometimes animal sacrifice, sometimes prayer and worship. And what they get back is the summoner's own personal wish. And the entity will never get a bad deal, unless it's unfair for your side. How do you study a phenomenon that constantly evades you? How do you escape a predator that masters camouflage? How do you win a game of chess against the highest form of intelligence? How do you trick the trickster? I don't know, but when I look at the way these entities communicate, it reminds me of scammers. Scammers trying to rush you to believe and to take action. And the more I discussed these ideas, the more people pointed me out to Robert Monroe, a parapsychologist and pioneer of astral projection. He talks about something he called lush, which is a type of energy that is said to be released when certain emotions are felt, such as love, joy, happiness, but also negative emotions. This could be one of the reasons why we see such ambivalent messages in apparitions, ranging from universal love to feelings of shame and fear. This theory also easily explains the eternal question of why do bad things happen to good people. It explains the cruelty of this world, and that predation in life is not a flaw or a sin. It is the design itself. That love, pleasure, hate, guilt, and everything in between is the fuel. Now, I don't personally believe in this theory, but as John Keel puts it, one can freely contemplate any absurd notion while remaining grounded. John Keel was one of the authors that followed the notions that all aspects of high strangeness, including Marian apparitions, are manifestations of a single phenomenon. Patrick Harpur later grabbed those ideas and connected several dots between religion, mythology, and the paranormal. His idea is that there's a parallel world coexisting with ours, and this world is inhabited by daemons, which are supernatural beings between mortals and gods that are not inherently good or evil. They interact with us with their own personal agendas. Some are good, some are evil, some are just tricksters. The Quran describes something very similar, which they call jinn, which is actually where the word genie comes from. The jinn are said to be smokeless fire, like plasma, and that they are not human nor deities and have their own primal desires. In this light, the manifestations would be authentic, in the sense that people actually see these beings, but the content of the message is tailored to the individual's beliefs. Catholics will see angels and demons, pagans will see pagan entities, and so on. Jim Samivan, a former intelligence officer in the CIA and founder of the To the Stars, has linked this phenomenon to reports of UFO abductions. He claims these are so hard to explain because, despite being real to the experiencer, they are not physical per se, and therefore almost impossible to prove. He alludes to the idea that certain entities are able to put thoughts and feelings into the minds of certain people. And of course, there are also political and sociological theories. Some people claim these apparitions are just individual delusions, sometimes infecting other susceptible minds, and in some rare cases even creating mass hysteria. Anything is possible when the belief clouds the judgment. Proponents of this theory claim that these are happening all the time to the faithful, but ever so often, the powers that be have a great deal to gain by hijacking its influence. For instance, in Fátima, it brought religion back into the hearts and minds of the people after the government forced its separation from the state in 1911. In Silva, it brought back the land to the hands of the Catholics and converted many Calvinists that were in power. In Medjugorje, it happened 10 years before the Civil War, in a place where socialist Yugoslavia was still a thing, and in a place where over 50% of the population was Muslim. In Khrushchev, in Ukraine, Our Lady appeared twice. The first time in 1914 to warn against Russia and the coming wars, and then in 1987, just before the fall of the Soviet Union. In both times, he strengthened the union of the Ukrainian people, especially in the Catholic circle, in a country where most of the population is Orthodox. In Vietnam, she showed up to Christians when they were being persecuted, had to flee their houses, and seek refuge in the rainforest. In Egypt, it appeared in a time where the Coptic Christians were feeling threatened by the Muslim, and it provided them reassurance in their faith even though they were in the minority. And in some of the visions, there was a message that warned against certain countries, like China or Russia. But maybe these have not been politically designed, but rather shaped by the natural human despair. In times of persecution, hopium can keep the people strong, but I'll leave you to decide. Now, maybe none of this is real. Maybe these are just illusions created by the minds of people looking for a virtuous motherly figure, looking for some sort of authority that can make humanity stop, repent, and love each other. And to be fair, a lot of these messages are positive. They provide a context for healing, they provide cures, positive messages for the world. But then again, we can never know the full content of the message, nor the intention behind them. The only thing that I can tell you is what the data can tell us. And that is that God gave us an impossible task. We've tried praying in His name. It didn't work. We've tried killing in His name. It didn't work. The world will never fully convert. And He knows it. He is omniscient. He is also ready to destroy almost all of His children, because they didn't convert on time or sinned along the way. To me, this doesn't feel holy. Telling a 10-year-old child that the fate of humanity depends on how much they sacrifice themselves, asking us to build chapels in their name and to pray 50 times a day, calling herself the cause of our joy, but threatening with eternal suffering, giving scarce proof of its power, and instead asking for faith, which, as Bill Maher puts it, it's making a virtue out of not sinking, asking for reparations for crimes we did not commit, calling us sinners simply for reproducing, calling us unfaithful for trying to survive in a world that was all along designed to kill us. I'm sorry, it doesn't feel holy. My name is Mario, and thanks for watching.